Fortune 500 company. Ursula Burns is the former CEO of Xerox. She was the first and only Black woman to run a Fortune 500 company. Today, there are four Black CEOs running Fortune 500 companies, none of which are women. But could our Vice President elect change that? Here to discuss how Kamala Harris may finally change how corporate America sees and treats Black women is Stephanie Cottle, CEO of Black Girl Group. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Do you believe we can actually see Harris create a shift in corporate policy?
Yeah, so I was actually reading through this article with the USA Today, and I think honestly, Asia, as excited as we are about VP elect Kamala Harris being in office, I think we also have to be very honest with ourselves and recognize that her win is only a very small part of a much longer journey that we as Black women have as it relates to breaking through the glass ceiling in corporate America.
I'm glad that you said that. I do want to bring up Ellen McGirt, senior editor and author of Fortune Magazine's Race Ahead column, who did say that African American women aren't making it to the top of corporate America because of the quote, black ceiling. What does that mean to you and for our audience who may not be familiar with that term?
Right, yeah. So the black ceiling actually says that, women and women of color in general, they have an opportunity to rise to higher heights in corporate America much quickly than Black women do. And so what the black ceiling says is that we have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And I think we're seeing that evident in corporate America in the landscape right now. Like you mentioned early on, Ursula Burns, she was elected as the CEO at Xerox in 2007. Since 2007, we have not seen a Black woman in corporate America at all. In fact, even those five CEOs, or four CEOs, I'm sorry, that you mentioned earlier, who do sit at the helm of Fortune 500 companies, they're all Black men. And again, I think there's this opportunity now with VP elect Harris being in office for us to finally have the opportunity to show the world that we as Black women not only deserve a seat at the table, but we deserve to sit at the head as well.
What do you think it actually takes, Stephanie, for us to see the change that we want, but that we also need when it comes to corporate America? Because we know that these changes are lucrative when it comes to these companies.
Right, absolutely. So I actually, within my company, I do a lot of work surrounding diversity and inclusion. And what I often tell my clients is that the job interview is not the start of a job. I also say that there's more work to do once even the job offer is made. And oftentimes, a lot of companies, especially Fortune 500 companies, they interview women and men of color, and they pat themselves on the back. And the biggest issue comes in not just recruiting diverse candidates, but also making sure those folks feel included once they actually get a seat at the table. So that means doing everything in your power once you've hired a Black woman or a Black man or any woman or man of color. Once you've hired them into your corporate office, make sure you're doing things to make sure that you retain them. Oftentimes what happens whenever we get into these positions, whether it's executive level or even at entry level, we often don't feel like we belong because we're not treated equally and fairly. That includes pay. That includes, just being simple as being offered opportunities for promotions as well. And so again, I think it's super important that once you hire these diverse candidates, that you make sure that you give them the leverage that they need in order to be successful.
It's a good point. And I think Kamala Harris, just the beginning, showing us that there are endless possibilities for what can be done for diversity and inclusion. We also saw after George Floyd and the reignition of the Black Lives Matter protests earlier this year that there is this push and excitement for companies to be more inclusive with their hiring. How do we hold those companies accountable for representation?
You do just that. And I often tell people that, these statements that were made, especially when George Floyd died, whenever Breonna Taylor died, they were great. But we also now have to hold them accountable to make sure that it's not just lip service, right? So if they were having this great energy surrounding racism back, 6 months ago, let's make sure we're doing everything possible to follow up with them to make sure that they said, hey, we're going to hire more diverse candidates, making sure that we're checking in with them by the end of this year to make sure they're actually doing the things that they said they were going to do. Back whenever all the popularity was surrounding, Black Lives Matter, I think we saw more brands than we possibly imagined speaking out. And again, speaking out is amazing, and I encourage more brands to continue to speak out. But at the end of the day, lip service means nothing if you put nothing behind those actions. And so now more than ever, it's important for us as leaders as Black men, as Black women, as men and women of color, for us to make sure that we're going to these companies directly and saying, hey, you said this 6 months ago. Where do you stand now? I also think one thing that I've been encouraging lots of Fortune 500 companies to do is making sure that they're having conversations with their employees that they already have within their companies to make sure that they're gaining that dialogue necessary to be able to keep a pulse on what's happening outside of their typical racial norms.
Sure. A really good point. Stephanie Cottle, CEO of Black Girl Group. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insight.